there really is a new world of work that is emerging in this city, and not just in this city, but in cities and rural areas and suburbs across the country. It's a world in which our core employment and labor laws are being systematically broken. And so it's minimum wage, prevailing wage, overtime, health and safety, workers' comp, discrimination, and right to organize. These are the core laws that define rights and standards in the workplace in the U.S., and we are finding that employers are beginning to systematically break those. It's happening in low-wage industries across our economy, so it's not just at the periphery, it's not just one or two employers, it's not just one or two industries, and in some segments it's becoming a growing way of actually doing business. Violations are becoming a business strategy to keep labor costs down, and that's what we call unregulated work. You know, we're trying to get at a piece of the labor market here that is not easy to penetrate. You can't just do a survey and call workers up and say, you know, are your rights being violated? You can't just call up employers and say, okay, tell me the truth, are you breaking the law? And so it really calls for a whole other methodology. And so it really took us 3 years of very intensive field work using a variety of methods to get into each of these industries and find out where unregulated work was happening. We did a total of 330 interviews, and just to give you a sense of that, you know, each of those represents about 4 to 6 weeks of trying to line up the interview, find the respondents, you know, traveling to where they are, doing 1, 2, even 3 hours worth of interviewing. So what types of violations did we find? I mean, I think a lot of the folks here will recognize a lot of these, but it's worth just doing the whole litany here. Payment below the minimum wage, it should also say prevailing wage on there as well, non-payment of wages, lack of overtime, denying breaks, stealing tips, failure to provide health and safety protections. Employers are definitely not paying workers' comp, and a lot of them aren't even carrying it. Definitely failure to pay payroll taxes on cash wages. Increasingly, we're seeing misclassification of workers as independent contractors, which is something that has been getting a lot of attention. Definitely retaliation for complaints or trying to organize it. And then discrimination, which we always really emphasize because it's a key part of this package of strategies. In terms of who are the workers, people tend to stereotype this labor market as being, it's all about undocumented workers, and undocumented workers are definitely bearing the brunt of these practices, but it's not just undocumented immigrants. We found plenty of documented immigrants who were at risk of workplace violations, people coming out of prison, re-entering the labor market, people transitioning off of welfare, and other folks who in different ways were stuck and being channeled into the bottom of the labor market. So, you know, it's a recurring refrain. This is about all workers, and it is about pressures being put on all workplaces. We have a long discussion in the report that I'm not going to bore you with about causes, our analysis of causes and drivers at work here, but I want to do a quick run just to give you a sense of how we understand what's going on here. In some industries, mainly manufacturing, garments, and even to some extent food manufacturing, it's been global competition and put the pressure on local employers to find any way to keep their costs down. But that was really not the main driver that we found in our research, because most of our industries where we found unregulated work were service industries. So much more common was subcontracting. That is definitely one of the key dynamics that is going on here. And what happens when you subcontract out? It's the subcontractors who can do the cutting of the corners, and the main employer can wash his hands of it and turn a blind eye to it. And subcontractors, as Patricia and others can attest to, are much harder to find and go after. Deunionization obviously is a huge part of the story here. I mean, unions have traditionally been one of the cornerstones of enforcement of workplace rights in this country, and in industry after industry, when you see declining unionization, that correlates with growing numbers of violations. Privatization makes itself felt here as well in the home health care industry. The contracting out of home health care providers means all of a sudden you're putting this work in an agency that starts to act like a profit center, and that is taking its cut of wages, which means there's fewer wages around for the home health care workers. And then the inequality effect, and this one I think is really important to understand, and I think it makes us, forces us to be a little self-reflective of who we are as a city. New York City right now is the most unequal city in the country, has been for some time, will continue to be. And there's a cycle that starts when you have lots of high-income households, creates demand for a lot of these types of services like domestic work, like getting your food delivered to your door, like bringing out your washing to the corner wash and dry. Creates a demand for all of these services that then employ a largely low-wage and immigrant workforce to provide those services, and really exacerbates the problem of unregulated work. So there's a piece here that is about consumers and our, like Jonathan said, our willingness to consume goods and services at the price of basically labor standards. The second big message from the report, though, also is that this isn't just, the invisible or visible hand of the market driving all of this, that public policy has played a role in allowing this to happen. It's been part of the problem, and we would argue it's part of the solution as well. Let me show you a graph. We did a Freedom of Information Act of the U.S. Department of Labor, so the Federal Department of Labor. Over the last 30 years, from 1975 to 2004, the number of investigators went down 14%. The number of completed investigations went down 36%. This is at the same time that the number of covered workers increased by 55%, and the number of covered work sites increased by 112%. That's an astonishing graph. That's an astonishing, whether it was passively or actively decided, that is public policy playing a role. Another way that public policy has played a role is really our failure to update our employment and labor laws for the new workplace. Our penalties aren't strong enough. Workers are falling outside of coverage, like domestic workers, but in independent contractors. And our standards in our employment and labor laws have gotten weaker and weaker, i.e. the decline of the minimum wage by 40% since 1968. So, final slide. So what's the solution? So I'm going to say very little here because there is incredible wisdom in this room about the solutions, and all of you have been working on developing them and creating innovative strategies, and our panelists that follow here are going to talk about them. I just want to, I'll put up sort of 3 conceptual boxes on our mind for the solutions that are needed. One is we absolutely need effective enforcement of our employment and labor laws, and I think that means both public-private, so improved enforcement on the public front and strategic litigation by unions and worker centers on the private front. But enforcement itself is not enough. I think a key part of this picture has to be updated and stronger standards for the 21st century workplace. That means stronger workplace laws that have broader reach, that can get more employers like subcontractors. And it also means, obviously, greater worker voice in the workplace. One of the best protections against violations is when you have organized workers who can bargain for high standards, obviously, and can enforce them. And then finally, you have to have equal status for all workers in the workplace, and that is comprehensive immigration reform. If you create different classes of workers, that in the end drives down standards for all workers. I would just say that what we are trying to really argue to folks is this needs to be all hands on deck. This is not just, immigrant workers. It's not just something that our advocates care about. Everyone has a stake in this. It's workers, employers, it's community residents, it's taxpayers, it's government. And I think our challenge going forward actually will be how to make that case, how to not particularize this issue, how to really speak the reality here, which is that if we let these types of practices continue, we are creating a completely segmented and polarized and unequal labor market for the next decades to come. So I look forward to continuing to work with all of you on that project, and thank you so much.